Her sleeve slipped and the bruises beneath weren't from clumsiness. Carlo Accardo's eyes froze on the purple marks wrapped around her wrist like shackles. Finger-shaped, deliberate, the kind that don't come from accidents. She whispered, "It's nothing, Mr. Accardo," pulling her hand back too quickly. But Carlo, a man who built empires by noticing what others hid, saw the truth trembling behind her smile. In that instant, the man who once ruled New York's underworld decided someone would pay. And by the time the city realized why its streets were already burning, if you're hooked in and want to enjoy this story, go ahead and subscribe, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see where everyone's watching. Plus, tomorrow I've got another incredible story lined up, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Alright, back to the story. At 7:15 a.m., he sat at his corner table in Cafe Verona, the morning drizzle painting streaks down the windows overlooking Thompson Street. To anyone passing by, he looked like any other businessman reviewing documents over espresso. But Carlo wasn't any other businessman. He was the kind of man who noticed the micro-expressions that crossed someone's face during a negotiation. The way someone's breath hitched when they were about to break. The split-second tell before betrayal. He noticed everything. It was why he was still alive. Why his enemies weren't. So when Susan Allison approached his table that gray Tuesday morning, he noticed immediately that something was wrong. Her right hand clutched the espresso saucer normally, but her left arm was pressed tight against her ribs, and her sleeve, the crisp white cuff of her server's uniform, was pulled down past her wrist. Not naturally down. Deliberately stretched, the fabric bunched in her palm like she was gripping a lifeline. "Good morning, Mr. Accardo," she said, her voice barely audible above the hiss of the espresso machine. It always was. In the 6 months Susan had worked at Cafe Verona, he'd never heard her raise her voice. Not when the kitchen was slammed, not when difficult customers barked orders, not even when Polly Terranova, drunk and stupid, had knocked over a full tray of glassware near her station. She'd simply cleaned it up, quiet and efficient, while Polly apologized to the floor. "Morning, Susan." He watched her approach, her movements careful and practiced, like someone who'd learned to take up as little space as possible. She set the small porcelain cup down with both hands, a habit he'd noticed before, ensuring it never rattled against the saucer, and that's when it happened. The sleeve slipped, just for a second, maybe 2. But it was enough. Dark purple bruises wrapped around her forearm, ugly and unmistakable. Some were fresh, the color of storm clouds. Others were fading to that sickly yellow-green that meant they were at least a week old. But what made Carlo's blood run cold was the pattern. Not the random marks of a fall or accident. Fingerprints. Someone had grabbed her. Hard. Recently. His eyes caught them before she yanked her sleeve back down. And he saw her freeze a deer caught in headlights, her entire body going rigid with panic. She knew he'd seen. "Susan," he said quietly, setting down his pen. "Sit." "Oh, I should get back to..." "Sit." It wasn't loud. Carlo never needed to be loud. His power lived in the silence between words, in the weight of expectation that bent rooms to his will. It was a tone that made governors return calls and union bosses reconsider strikes. Susan sat in the chair across from him, perching on the edge like a bird ready to bolt. Her hands disappeared into her lap, sleeves pulled down, knuckles white. "What happened to your arm?" "Nothing, sir. I'm just clumsy." She forced a laugh that sounded like something breaking. "I bumped it on the counter yesterday while cleaning up. You know how narrow the space is behind the bar." Carlo leaned back in his chair, studying her. Susan Allison was 26, he knew from her employment file, vetted personally when his head barista, Mira, recommended her. Petite, with dark hair always pulled into a neat bun and warm brown eyes that now refused to meet his. She was thorough, never late, and in 6 months had never once asked him a personal question. But Mira hadn't mentioned the fear. Because that's what Carlo saw now, sitting across from him in the early morning light of his cafe. Not embarrassment about clumsiness, not frustration at her own carelessness. Fear, pure and primal. "Both arms?" he asked gently, watching how her right hand unconsciously moved to grip her left forearm, protective. Susan's face lost what little color it had. Yes, I'm very clumsy. Always have been." "Show me." "Mr. Accardo, really, I'm fine." "Susan." He kept his voice soft, controlled. "Show me." Her hands trembled as she slowly, reluctantly, pulled back both sleeves. The bruises mirrored each other. Dark rings around both wrists, the pattern unmistakable. Someone had grabbed her from the front, their thumbs pressing into the soft underside of her arms while their fingers wrapped around, holding her in place. The kind of grip that said, "Times you're not going anywhere." The bruises were layered, 2 fresh marks over healing ones. This wasn't a one-time incident. Carlo felt something cold and familiar settle in his chest. He'd built his empire in the shadows of New York's underworld. He'd made decisions most men couldn't stomach, crossed lines that kept him awake on the rare nights his conscience spoke up. But he had rules, codes that weren't written down but were harder than any law. And one of those rules was simple. You didn't hurt people who couldn't fight back. Someone had hurt Susan. Someone had grabbed this woman, this quiet, diligent person who showed up every morning to make coffee and clear tables hard enough to leave marks that looked days old, and she was terrified enough to lie about it. Who did this? No one. I told you. Susan. He leaned forward, making himself smaller, less threatening. You work in my establishment, under my roof. That means you're under my protection. Do you understand? She looked at him with those frightened eyes, and for a moment he thought she might tell him. Her lips parted slightly. He could see her weighing the cost of truth against the cost of silence. Then she stood abruptly. I really should get back to work. The morning rush is coming. Susan. Thank you for your concern, Mr. Ricardo. I promise I'll be more careful. She fled across the cafe floor toward the bar. Carlo sat alone, his espresso untouched and going cold. He couldn't stop seeing those bruises, couldn't stop seeing the fear. In that moment, surrounded by the gentle hum of morning conversation, the most powerful man in New York made a decision that would shake the city to its foundations. Susan Allison would never be hurt again. Carlo sat motionless at his corner table for exactly 3 minutes after Susan disappeared behind the bar. To the handful of early morning customers filtering into Cafe Verona, he appeared calm, a businessman lost in thought, his espresso cooling in its cup. But beneath the tailored Italian suit and the carefully neutral expression, something ancient and dangerous had awakened. He'd seen men broken in interrogation rooms, watched rivals bleed out in abandoned warehouses, built an empire on calculated violence and strategic fear. But those men had chosen their path. They'd walked into his world with their eyes open, knowing the rules of engagement. Susan Allison hadn't chosen anything. She just wanted to pour coffee and go home. That made all the difference. Carlo stood, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced precision. He caught Mira's eye across the cafe, his head barista, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who'd worked for him since he'd opened Verona 8 years ago. She nodded once, understanding the unspoken command. Watch her. He walked through the cafe's back entrance, past the kitchen, where morning prep was already underway, and up the narrow staircase that led to his private office. The room was modest by his standards, a desk, 2 chairs, a window overlooking the street below, and a wall safe hidden behind a painting of the Amalfi Coast. But it was soundproof, secure, and connected to a network that reached into every shadow of New York City. Carlo pulled out his phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. Yeah. Boss? Vince Morelli answered on the second ring, his voice rough with sleep. My office. 20 minutes. Everything okay? 20 minutes, Vince. He ended the call and moved to the window, watching the street come alive below. A delivery truck double-parked. A mother walked her daughter to the bus stop, both laughing at something on the girl's phone. A jogger splashed through puddles left by the morning rain. Normal people, living normal lives. Susan should have been one of them. Carlo's reflection stared back at him from the window glass, dark hair graying at the temples, sharp features that his mother once said looked like his grandfather's, and eyes that had seen too much to ever look truly young. He was 43. Old enough to know that violence solved some problems and created others. Old enough to understand that the truest power wasn't in the gun or the knife. It was in knowing exactly where to apply pressure until the whole structure collapsed. 18 minutes later, Vince Morelli knocked twice and entered without waiting for permission. Carlo's consigliere was built like a truck, 6'3", 240 pounds of muscle wrapped in a charcoal suit that strained at the shoulders. His nose had been broken 3 times, and a scar traced his left jawline from a knife fight in his 20s. But his eyes were sharp, intelligent, and completely loyal. What happened? Vince asked, reading Carlo's posture instantly. Susan Allison. What do we know about her? Vince's brow furrowed. The waitress? Quiet girl, always on time. Mira vouched for her 6 months ago. Clean background check. No criminal record, no outstanding debts. Lives in a studio apartment in Hell's Kitchen. Pays rent on time. Why? Someone's hurting her. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Who? Vince's voice went flat, professional. I don't know yet. That's why you're here. Carlo turned from the window, his expression carved from stone. I want everything. Her phone records, bank statements, social media, employment history. Every person she's interacted with in the last year. Who she dates, who she fights with, who she avoids. I want to know what she eats for breakfast and what keeps her awake at night. Vince pulled out his phone, already typing notes. How bad are we talking? Bruises on both wrists, finger-shaped, layered, some fresh, some healing. She lied to my face about it, said she was clumsy. But I saw her eyes, Vince. She's terrified. Jesus. Vince looked up, his jaw tight. You want me to grab whoever it is? Have a conversation? No. Carlo's voice was absolute. This doesn't end with a broken arm in an alley. That's too quick, too simple. I want to know everything about whoever's doing this to her. Everything they value, everyone they love, every secret they're hiding. And then I want to take it all away. Vince studied his boss for a long moment. They'd known each other for 20 years, since Vince was an enforcer, and Carlo was still proving himself to the old families. Vince had seen Carlo order executions without blinking, had watched him negotiate treaties that reshaped the city's underworld. But this was different. This was personal in a way that made even Vince uncomfortable. Boss, you sure about this? She's just a waitress. If we start digging, asking questions, people might wonder why you care so much about. She works under my roof. Carlo's words cut like a blade. In my establishment. That makes her mine to protect. And I don't care if people wonder. Let them wonder. Let them talk. But make it clear, crystal fucking clear, that if anyone even thinks about touching her again, they'll answer to me personally. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. There's another thing, Carlo added, his voice softer now. No violence. Not yet. Maybe not ever. We don't threaten. We don't grab people in parking lots. We calculate. We gather information, and we use it like a scalpel. Whoever's hurting Susan thinks they're untouchable. I want to prove them wrong without them ever seeing us coming. Vince nodded slowly. All right. I'll start with her apartment building. Doormen, neighbors, surveillance cameras. Should have something by tonight. Good. And Vince? Carlo waited until his consigliere met his eyes. No one knows about this except us. Not Paulie, not Marco, not anyone. This stays quiet until I say otherwise. Understood. After Vince left, Carlo returned to the window. Down below, Susan emerged from the cafe's front entrance, her coat pulled tight despite the morning's warmth. She walked quickly, her head down, and disappeared around the corner toward the subway station. Carlo's reflection stared back at him, and for the first time in years, he felt something close to righteousness. Whoever had put those bruises on Susan's arms had made a fatal miscalculation. They'd hurt someone under his protection. And Carlo Accardo never forgot. Vince Morelli returned to Carlo's office at 11:47 p.m., his face carved from granite. He carried a manila folder thick with documents and photographs, but it was the way he gripped it like it contained something toxic that made Carlo set down his glass of whiskey. Tell me you found him, Carlo said quietly. I found him. Vince's voice was flat, controlled. And boss, this is worse than we thought. He dropped the folder on Carlo's desk. The top photograph showed a man in his late 30s, square jaw, military haircut, cold blue eyes that stared at the camera with practiced authority. He wore an NYPD uniform, 3 commendation bars pinned to his chest. Detective Raymond Holt, Vince said, the name tasting bitter on his tongue. Decorated officer, 12 years on the force, works out of the 14th precinct, 2 citations for bravery, 1 for saving a kid from a burning building. The press loves him. The mayors mentioned him by name in 3 different speeches about New York's finest. Carlo picked up the photograph, studying the face. Holt looked like someone's idea of a hero, strong, confident, trustworthy. The kind of man parents pointed to when they told their kids to find a police officer if they were lost. Keep going, Carlo said, his voice dangerously quiet. He's been dating Susan for 8 months. Started friendly. According to her coworker at her old job, she used to waitress at a diner in Murray Hill before Mira brought her here. Holt came in regular, left big tips, asked her out. She said yes. Vince flipped through the folder, pulling out surveillance photos. First 3 months looked normal. Dinner dates, movies, the whole romantic thing. Then she moved apartments suddenly. Didn't tell anyone at the diner why, just quit with 2 days' notice. He moved her. Carlo said, reading between the lines. Yeah, got her a studio in Hell's Kitchen. His name's not on the lease, but my guy traced the deposit check. Came from an account registered to Holt's mother, but the handwriting matches his signature on police reports. Classic control move: isolate the victim, make her dependent. Carlo felt that cold rage settling deeper into his chest. He'd seen this pattern before, in different contexts. Men who needed to own, to dominate, to crush anything that reminded them they were human. The neighbors? He asked. Heard arguing, lots of it. One woman on Susan's floor said she almost called the cops twice, but Vince's jaw tightened. She saw Holt leaving in uniform once, figured if he was a cop, maybe she was the problem. Of course she did. Carlo's words dripped with contempt. What else? Vince pulled out another document: phone records, highlighted in yellow. He calls her 17, 18 times a day, sometimes more. Started tracking her phone about 4 months ago. I found the spyware when I had our tech guy check her cell. He knows where she is every minute. If she doesn't answer within 5 minutes, he shows up wherever she is. He's stalking her with a badge. It gets worse. Vince sat down heavily in the chair across from Carlo. I talked to a friend at the 14th. Very quietly, very carefully. Holt's got a reputation. 3 complaints filed against him in the last 5 years: excessive force, witness intimidation, verbal abuse, all of them buried by his lieutenant, who happens to be married to a city councilwoman. Holt's untouchable, boss. He knows it. His precinct knows it. And anyone who's tried to challenge him has found their life suddenly very complicated. Carlo stood, moving to the window. The street below was empty now, rain beginning to fall again, painting halos around the streetlights. Somewhere out there, Susan was probably lying awake in her apartment, her phone next to her pillow, waiting for it to ring, waiting for Holt to check on her, waiting for permission to sleep. There's one more thing, Vince said quietly. The reason he targeted her specifically. Carlo turned, his expression dangerous. 4 years ago, Susan witnessed a robbery at a convenience store in Queens. Testified in court against one of Holt's confidential informants, a dealer named Marcus Webb, who Holt was using to make cases. Susan's testimony put Webb away for 5 years because she told the truth about what she saw. Holt lost his golden informant and took heat from his captain for not vetting Webb better. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. He's been punishing her, Carlo said. For 4 years, he's been destroying her life because she had the courage to tell the truth. Yeah. Vince's hands curled into fists. He waited, watched her, then swooped in, playing the good guy. Classic predator behavior. She probably thought she was finally safe with a cop. Had no idea he'd been waiting to make her pay. Carlo returned to his desk, spreading out the documents like pieces of a puzzle. Bank records showing Holt's assets far more than a detective's salary should provide. Photographs of him leaving high-end restaurants, wearing watches that cost more than most cars. Reports of closed cases with questionable evidence. A pattern of corruption running so deep it had become structural. He thinks he's protected, Carlo said, his voice soft and lethal. The badge, the precinct, the political connections. He thinks he's built a wall around himself that no one can touch. He has, boss. Taking him down directly would mean going to war with half the NYPD. Even our people in the department won't touch this, it's too hot. Then we don't go direct. Carlo looked up, his eyes blazing with cold calculation. We don't touch him at all. We let the system eat him alive from the inside. How? Every corrupt cop leaves a trail. Bank accounts that don't add up. Evidence that disappears. Witnesses who suddenly change their stories. Holt's been protected because no one's looked hard enough. Because his lieutenant buries the complaints before they go anywhere. Carlo tapped the folder with one finger. We're going to dig up every piece of dirt he's ever buried. Every bribe, every falsified report, every illegal dollar. And then we're going to feed it to someone who can't be bought, can't be threatened, and can't be stopped once they smell blood. Who? The press. Internal affairs. The FBI if we find federal crimes. We turn his protection into his prison. Carlo's smile was cold and sharp, and we make sure that when it all comes out, Raymond Holt's name becomes synonymous with everything wrong with the NYPD. Vince nodded slowly, understanding dawning. That'll take time. Weeks, maybe months. Then we have weeks, months, however long it takes. Carlo closed the folder. But Vince, while we're building the case, Susan doesn't get hurt again. Put surveillance on her apartment building. I want to know every time Holt comes near her, if he touches her, If he threatens her, if he so much as raises his voice, we intervene? No. Carlo's voice was absolute. We document. We record. We add it to the pile. Every crime, every abuse, every moment he thinks he's untouchable. It all becomes evidence. And if he really hurts her? Before we're ready? Carlo met his consigliere's eyes, and Vince saw something there that made him glad they were on the same side. Then we stopped being patient. For the next 9 days, Carlo watched Susan Allison with the same intensity he'd once reserved for enemies and rivals. But this wasn't surveillance born of suspicion. It was protection wrapped in observation. A silent vigil he couldn't explain to anyone, including himself. She arrived every morning at 6:52 a.m., exactly 8 minutes before her shift started. Never early enough to seem eager, never late enough to draw attention. She moved through Café Verona like a ghost, trying not to disturb the air, efficient, invisible, perfect, too perfect. On Tuesday, Carlo watched her drop a coffee cup. It shattered across the tile floor in an explosion of porcelain and espresso, and Susan's entire body locked up like she'd been struck. Her face went white. Her hands started shaking so violently she had to grip the counter to steady herself. Mira rushed over with a broom, murmuring reassurances, but Susan couldn't seem to breathe properly for a full minute. It was just a cup. An accident. The kind of thing that happened a dozen times a week in any cafe. But Susan looked like she'd just triggered a landmine. Carlo understood then. The perfection wasn't professionalism, it was survival. Every careful movement, every quiet word, every moment of invisible service was armor against something worse. She'd learned that mistakes had consequences, and those consequences left bruises. On Wednesday, a customer got loud, some Wall Street type angry about his latte taking too long. He didn't threaten Susan, didn't even raise his voice at her specifically, just made noise about the incompetent service while she was clearing the next table. She flinched. A full-body flinch like she expected a blow. Carlo stood from his corner table, his mere presence shifting the room's atmosphere like a pressure drop before a storm. The Wall Street type looked up, met Carlo's eyes, and suddenly remembered an important meeting elsewhere. He left a $50 bill on the counter and walked out quickly. Susan never noticed. She was too busy trying to make herself smaller, her shoulders hunched, her breathing shallow. That night, Carlo sat in his office reviewing Vince's surveillance reports. Holt had called Susan 43 times over the past 9 days. She'd answered every single call within 2 rings. The conversations were short, clipped, with Susan mostly responding in yes-no answers. But it was the pattern that told the real story. Holt called when Susan was on her way to work, during her lunch break, on her way home, before bed. It wasn't love or concern, it was a leash, pulled tight, reminding her constantly that she was never truly alone. The surveillance photos showed Holt following her twice. Once from the subway to her apartment building, once from the grocery store, staying 3 cars back, close enough to watch but far enough to maintain deniability. Hunting behavior. That's what Vince had called it. Carlo called it something simpler. Terrorism. On Friday morning, Susan came to work with makeup carefully applied to her left cheek. Not heavy, not obvious to most people. But Carlo had spent 20 years reading people's faces for lies, and he saw the foundation caked just slightly thicker on one side, covering something she didn't want the world to see. She moved slower that day, favored her left side. When she reached up to grab something from a high shelf, she winced just for a second before catching herself and forcing her expression back to neutral. Mira noticed too. Carlo watched his head barista pull Susan aside during the afternoon lull, saw the gentle concern in Mira's body language, the way she touched Susan's arm softly while speaking. Susan smiled, shook her head, said something that made Mira frown but ultimately nod and walk away. Asterisk, I'm fine. Just tired. Didn't sleep well. Asterisk. The lies of someone who'd perfected the art of invisible suffering. That evening, Carlo had Vince pull Susan's complete history, not just the surface background check they'd done when she was hired, but everything. School records, employment history, every address she'd ever lived at, every relationship that left a paper trail. What emerged was a portrait of quiet resilience that made Carlo's chest ache in unfamiliar ways. Susan had put herself through community college while working 2 jobs. Graduated with honors despite having no family support. Her mother had died when she was 19, father unknown. She'd been a witness to the convenience store robbery because she'd been working there as a second job, saving money for textbooks. She'd testified against Marcus Webb knowing it would cost her that job, knowing Webb's friends might retaliate. She'd done it anyway because it was the right thing to do. and Raymond Holt had punished her for that integrity ever since. "There's something else," Vince said, sliding another document across Carlo's desk. "I found the original witness statement she gave 4 years ago, before Holt got involved in the case." Carlo read it carefully. Susan's account was detailed, precise, unflinching. She described exactly what she saw, including details that implicated Webb, but also contradicted the initial police report filed by Holt, Carlo said quietly. He filed the initial report, got the details wrong, probably because he was protecting his informant. Then Susan testified and exposed the inconsistencies. "Made him look incompetent in front of a grand jury," Vince confirmed. "His captain chewed him out in front of half the precinct. Rumor is it cost him a promotion." So Holt had waited, watched, found Susan years later, and inserted himself into her life wearing the mask of a hero, all so he could make her pay, slowly, for having the courage to tell the truth when he'd tried to bury it. Carlo stood and moved to his window, looking down at the cafe below. Susan was wiping down tables, her movements mechanical and precise. Even from this distance, he could see the exhaustion in the slope of her shoulders. She showed up every single day, despite the fear, despite the pain, despite a man with a badge systematically destroying her sense of safety. She showed up and did her job with quiet dignity, never complaining, never asking for help, never giving up. Most of the men Carlo knew hard men, dangerous men who thought they were strong would have broken under less. But Susan Allison kept showing up. That kind of courage deserved protection, deserved justice, deserved someone willing to burn down the world that had failed her. Carlo picked up his phone and called Vince. "I want everything," he said quietly. "Every corrupt case Holt's ever touched, every dollar he's taken, every lie he's told under oath. I don't care how long it takes or what it costs. That man thought he could destroy her for telling the truth, so we're going to destroy him with it." "Understood, boss." Carlo ended the call and returned his gaze to Susan below. She was laughing at something Mira said, a small, fragile sound that didn't quite reach her eyes. Asterisk. "Hold on." Asterisk, he thought. Asterisk. "Just hold on a little longer." Asterisk. The pieces were moving into position. The game had begun. And Raymond Holt had no idea he was already losing. The war room wasn't what most people would expect. No weapons on the walls, no maps with red pins marking targets. Just Carlo's private office, above Cafe Verona, filled with filing boxes, laptops, and the quiet hum of men working with surgical precision. Vince had assembled a team of 5 Carlo's most trusted people, each chosen for skills that had nothing to do with violence. There was Marcus Chen, a forensic accountant who'd once worked for the Treasury Department before deciding government pay wasn't worth the boredom. Angela Russo, a former investigative journalist who'd burned too many bridges chasing stories the powerful wanted buried. Tommy Numbers, Calabrese, who could hack systems that didn't officially exist. And 2 others whose names Carlo kept even from himself, information brokers who traded in secrets like currency. They'd been working for 3 weeks, and the evidence was staggering. "Let's start with the money," Marcus said, spreading financial documents across Carlo's desk like a dealer laying out cards. "Detective Raymond Holt makes $89,000 a year, plus overtime. After taxes, call it maybe $65,000 take home." Carlo leaned forward, studying the numbers. But over the past 6 years, he's deposited $340,000 into various accounts. Some in his name, some in his mother's name. One in a Shell LLC registered in Delaware. Marcus tapped a highlighted section. "The deposits are careful never more than $9,000 at once to avoid federal reporting requirements. Classic structuring behavior." "Where's it coming from?" Carlo asked. "That's where it gets interesting." Angela pulled out a separate folder, this one thick with photocopied police reports. "I cross-referenced the deposits with Holt's case files. Every significant payment corresponds to a case that got dropped, evidence that disappeared, or a witness who suddenly refused to testify." She laid out 3 examples, connecting the dots with red ink. January 2023, $8,500. Deposited 3 days after assault charges against a bar owner named Vincent Calabria. Mysteriously disappeared. The victim changed her story, said she misremembered the attack. March 2023, $7,200 deposited the same week that 2 kilos of cocaine vanished from the evidence locker. Case against a mid-level dealer named Robert Torres collapsed without the physical evidence. August 2023, $9,000 deposited after Holt testified in a police brutality hearing that his partner, Officer James Morrison, used appropriate force during an arrest. Dashcam footage from that night was somehow corrupted. Morrison kept his badge. Carlo absorbed each detail, his mind cataloging the pattern. This wasn't just a bad cop taking bribes. This was systematic corruption. A one-man crime wave hiding behind a shield. "How many cases total?" he asked. 19 that we can prove with documents, Angela said. Probably twice that many if we count the ones where the evidence was destroyed too thoroughly. Tommy looked up from his laptop, adjusting his glasses. "And boss, I found something else. Holt's been using NYPD databases to run searches on people who aren't connected to any active cases. Hundreds of queries over the past 3 years, criminal records, addresses, financial information. He's selling information," Vince said from his position by the window. "Or using it for leverage," Carlo added. "Who's he searching?" "Business owners mostly. Some politicians. A few lawyers. Several people with gambling debts or immigration issues. Anyone vulnerable." Tommy pulled up a spreadsheet. "I matched the searches to his deposits. The timeline fits. He digs up dirt, approaches the target privately, and suddenly money appears in his accounts." "Extortion with a badge," Angela muttered. "Beautiful. The victims can't report him because he's the one they'd report to." Carlo stood and walked to the window, looking down at the morning crowd flowing past Cafe Verona. Somewhere in that river of humanity, Raymond Holt was walking around believing himself untouchable, believing that the badge gave him permission to terrorize whoever he wanted. "What about internal affairs?" Carlo asked. "You said there were complaints filed." Angela nodded grimly. 3 formal complaints over 5 years, 2 for excessive force, 1 for witness intimidation. All of them buried by Lieutenant Kevin Walsh, Holt's commanding officer. "Let me guess, Walsh is dirty too?" "Not quite. Walsh is married to City Councilwoman Patricia Walsh. She sits on the committee that approves NYPD budget increases and promotions. Walsh protects Holt, because Holt brings in arrests that make Walsh's numbers look good, which makes his wife happy, which keeps his marriage intact." Angela's expression was disgusted. "It's not corruption, it's just institutional self-interest, which is somehow worse." "So internal affairs won't touch him," Carlo said. "Not unless the evidence is absolutely overwhelming and completely public. They need political cover to move against someone with Holt's connections." Carlo turned back to his team. "Then we give them overwhelming. We give them undeniable. We give them evidence so solid that protecting Holt would destroy everyone who touches it." "We're already building it," Vince said. "Marcus has the financial records documenting the bribes. Angela's verified 19 cases of corruption. Tommy's got proof he's been illegally accessing databases. We've got enough to bury him twice over. But there's a problem," Angela interjected. "All this evidence was obtained through," she gestured vaguely, "let's call them unconventional methods. We can't just hand this to Internal Affairs or the FBI. They'll ask how we got it, and everything falls apart." Carlo had already considered this. "So we don't hand it to them. We leak it to someone who can authenticate the information independently. Someone who'll dig deeper and find the official sources to back up what we're giving them." "A journalist," Angela said, understanding dawning. "Someone with credibility and resources." "Exactly. Someone hungry enough to chase the story but legitimate enough that when they publish, the authorities have to respond." Carlo looked at Angela. "You used to work in investigative journalism. Who's the best?" Angela thought for a moment. Diane Hartfield at the Times New York Chronicle **. She broke the story on the pension fund scandal last year. Tenacious as hell. Won't back down from pressure. And she's got editors who'll protect her sources. If we give her enough to start digging, she'll find the rest herself." "Perfect." Carlo turned to Marcus. "Clean up the financial documents, remove any indication of how we obtained them. Make it look like an anonymous tipster from inside the department. Tommy, same with the database records. Angela, you'll be our intermediary. You've got credibility in that world." "What about the personal stuff?" Vince asked. "The abuse, the stalking, the threats against Susan?" Carlo's expression hardened. "That's the final piece. We've been documenting everything, the calls, the following, the surveillance. Once the corruption story breaks, and Holt's on the defensive, we leak evidence of him abusing his authority to terrorize a civilian. We make him into the perfect villain, corrupt cop who beats women. The press will eat him alive," Angela said. "The press, Internal Affairs, the FBI, the mayor's office, everyone will want a piece of him. And by the time they're done, Raymond Holt won't just lose his badge. He'll lose everything." Carlo returned to the desk, looking at the assembled evidence, weeks of meticulous work, hundreds of hours of investigation, all building toward a single devastating moment. "How long until we're ready to move?" he asked. 2 weeks, Marcus said. "Maybe 3. We need to verify a few more financial transactions, get copies of the official case files to give Hartfield something to authenticate our information. Then we have 3 weeks." Carlo's voice was cold and absolute. "But understand this, once we start, we don't stop. Holt will know someone's coming for him. He'll get desperate, dangerous. We need to be ready for anything." Vince nodded. "I've got people watching Susan around the clock. If Holt makes a move, we document it," Carlo interrupted. "Everything becomes evidence. Every threat, every moment of intimidation. We're building a case that'll stand up in court, and the court of public opinion." "And if he really hurts her?" Vince asked quietly. Carlo met his consigliere's eyes. "Then the plan changes, and we remind Detective Holt that there are things worse than prison." The room fell silent, everyone understanding the unspoken promise. "All right," Carlo said. 3 weeks. Let's make them count." The first crack in Raymond Holt's armor appeared on a Thursday morning, buried on page 6 of the Times New York Chronicle Times under the headline, "Questions Raised Over Missing Evidence in NYPD Cases." Diane Hartfield's article was surgical, careful not to name Holt directly yet, but laying out a pattern of irregularities at the 14th precinct. Evidence that vanished, cases that collapsed mysteriously, witnesses who changed their stories after speaking with investigating officers. Carlo read it over his morning espresso at Cafe Verona, watching Susan work across the room. She didn't know that the 800-word article was the opening salvo in a war that would reshape her life. She didn't know anything yet. And that's how it had to stay. By Friday, the story had grown. Hartfield published a follow-up naming the precinct specifically and citing anonymous sources within the department, who confirmed that Internal Affairs had opened a preliminary inquiry into evidence handling procedures. Carlo's phone buzzed with a text from Angela. Asterisk. "She's hooked. Asking for more. Asterisk." By Monday, Raymond Holt was no longer invisible. Vince's surveillance team reported the changes immediately. Holt had been called into a meeting with Lieutenant Walsh that lasted 90 minutes. He emerged looking rattled, his usual cocky stride replaced with something tighter, more controlled. That afternoon, his union representative showed up at the precinct. "He knows someone's digging," Vince said, standing in Carlo's office reviewing the day's surveillance footage. "Watch this." The video showed Holt in his car outside the 14th precinct, phone pressed to his ear. Even without audio, his body language screamed stress, jaw clenched, free hand gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles went white. "Who's he calling?" Carlo asked. "We pulled the records. First call was to his bank. Second to his lawyer. Third," Vince paused meaningfully, "to Susan." Carlo's expression darkened. "When?" 4:47 p.m., lasted 8 minutes. Our tap caught most of it. Vince pulled up the audio file on his laptop. Holt's voice came through, tinny but clear, each word dripping with barely controlled rage. Asterisk, "Where are you?" Asterisk. Asterisk. I'm at work. My shift ends at asterisk. Asterisk. "I don't care about your shift. Are you talking to people about me?" Asterisk. Asterisk. "What? No, I would never asterisk." Asterisk. "Someone's asking questions, Susan. Someone's digging into my life, my cases, and the only person who knows anything is you." Asterisk. Asterisk, "Raymond, I swear, I haven't said anything to anyone. I don't even know what you're talking about." Asterisk. Asterisk, "You better not be lying to me, because if I find out you went to the press, if you talked to Internal Affairs, if you told anyone asterisk, asterisk, I didn't. Please, I promise, I didn't say anything. Asterisk." The fear in Susan's voice made Carlo's hands curl into fists. Asterisk. "I'll know if you're lying. I always know. I'll be watching you even closer now. Every move, every conversation, every goddamn breath. You understand me?" Asterisk. Asterisk. "Yes. Asterisk. Asterisk. Say it again. Asterisk. I understand. Asterisk. Good. Now get back to work and keep your mouth shut. Asterisk." The call ended abruptly. Vince closed the laptop. "That was this afternoon," he said quietly. "Susan's been jumpy ever since. Dropped 2 cups during the dinner shift. Mira had to send her home early." Carlo stood and moved to the window, his reflection staring back at him in the darkening glass. Below, the cafe was closing down for the night. Susan had already left, probably heading back to her apartment where Holt's surveillance software tracked her every move. "He's scared," Carlo said. "Good. Scared people make mistakes. They also get violent," Vince countered. "We're pushing him toward the edge, boss. What happens when he goes over? Then we catch him on camera doing something that destroys him completely." Carlo turned back. "How's our surveillance on Susan's building?" 3 cameras covering the entrance and her floor. Audio in the hallway outside her apartment. We can't go inside, but we'll hear anything that happens in the corridor. Plus, we've got 2 guys rotating shifts in a car across the street. Not enough. I want 4 guys. 2 in the car, 2 on foot. If Holt shows up, I want every second documented. He'll spot a tail if we get too close. He's paranoid right now. He's seeing threats everywhere. That works in our favor. He'll be too distracted watching his own back to notice ours." Vince nodded and pulled out his phone to make arrangements. Carlo returned his attention to the window, his mind running through scenarios and contingencies. The next domino fell Wednesday morning. Diane Hartfield published her 3rd article, and this time she named names. Detective Raymond Holt under internal investigation for evidence tampering. The piece included testimonies from 2 witnesses in previous cases who now felt safe enough to speak on record about Holt pressuring them to change their statements. The article went viral by noon. Local news picked it up. Police reform advocates started tweeting about it. By evening, the mayor's office issued a carefully worded statement about taking all allegations seriously and supporting a thorough investigation. Carlo watched it unfold like dominoes falling in perfect sequence. That night, Holt's world began to crumble in earnest. His bank accounts were frozen pending an internal affairs investigation into financial irregularities. His partner, Officer Morrison, the one he'd protected during the brutality hearing, was reassigned to desk duty pending his own review. Whispers started circulating through the 14th precinct, the kind of institutional gossip that destroyed careers. By Thursday, Holt was toxic. Vince's sources inside the precinct reported that other officers were avoiding him in the break room. His lieutenant had stopped returning his calls. Even the union rep seemed less enthusiastic about defending him. "He's isolated," Vince reported. "Everyone who used to protect him is backing away. They can smell the blood in the water." "What about Susan?" "Holt called her 19 times yesterday." She answered 17. "The surveillance shows he drove past her apartment building 4 times last night between midnight and 4 a.m. Carlo's jaw tightened. He's circling, trying to figure out if she's the leak. What if he decides she is? Then he makes the mistake we've been waiting for. Carlo pulled up the surveillance feeds on his computer. He's desperate now. Desperate men don't think clearly. They act on emotion, on fear, on rage. And when Holt finally snaps, when he stops being careful and shows the world what he really is, we'll have every camera rolling. Vince studied his boss carefully. "You're using her as bait." "I'm protecting her," Carlo corrected, his voice hard. "Every move we've made has been to build a cage around Holt so tight he can't touch her without destroying himself completely. Yes, we're letting him feel the pressure. Yes, we're watching to see how he reacts. But Susan is surrounded by my people 24 hours a day. Holt can't get to her without going through us. And if he tries anyway?" Carlo's smile was cold and sharp. "Then we get everything we need to finish this, and Raymond Holt learns what happens when you threaten something I've decided to protect." Friday evening, the pressure found its release. Holt showed up at Cafe Verona. He didn't come in uniform that would have been too obvious. Instead, he wore jeans and a leather jacket, trying to look casual as he took a seat at the counter. But Carlo saw him immediately, saw the tightness around his eyes, the way his hands trembled slightly as he ordered coffee from Mira, saw how his gaze tracked Susan as she moved through the cafe, oblivious to the predator watching her. Carlo remained at his corner table, appearing to read a newspaper while every sense focused on Holt. Around the cafe, 3 of his people were positioned casually, Marco near the door, Polly at a window table, Angela posing as a customer with a laptop. Everyone was ready. Holt waited until Susan approached to refill his coffee. As she reached for his cup, he grabbed her wrist. Not hard, not violent, just firm enough to stop her movement, his fingers wrapping around the exact spots where old bruises had finally started to fade. "We need to talk," Holt said quietly. And Carlo stood up. Carlo crossed the cafe floor in 6 strides, his presence shifting the atmosphere like a storm front moving in. Conversations died mid-sentence. Customers looked up from their phones. Even the espresso machine seemed to hiss more quietly. Holt's hand was still wrapped around Susan's wrist. "Let her go," Carlo said quietly. Holt looked up, his face a mask of fake confusion. "Excuse me? I'm just talking to—" "Let her go." The words carried weight that had nothing to do with volume. It was the tone of a man who'd ordered executions with less emotion, who'd watched empires crumble with the same calm detachment. Holt released Susan's wrist slowly, deliberately, like he was doing Carlo a favor. "I don't know who you think you are, but this is a private conversation between me and my girlfriend." "No," Carlo said. "This is you leaving my establishment. Now." "Your establishment?" Holt's laugh was sharp and bitter. "You know who I am? I'm NYPD. I could have this place shut down for health violations before—" Detective Raymond Holt, badge number 4, 7293. Currently under internal affairs investigation for evidence tampering, financial irregularities, and abuse of police databases. Carlo's voice remained perfectly calm, each word precise as a scalpel. 12 years on the force, 3 formal complaints buried by your lieutenant, and approximately $340,000 in unexplained deposits over 6 years. Did I miss anything? The color drained from Holt's face. "I don't know what you think you know, but I know you need to leave. Susan has work to do." Holt stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He was bigger than Carlo, younger, probably thought his police training gave him an advantage in a physical confrontation. But something in Carlo's eyes made him hesitate, some recognition that violence here would end very badly for him. "This isn't over," Holt said, looking past Carlo to Susan. "We'll talk later. At home." "She doesn't have to go anywhere with you," Carlo said. "She's my girlfriend. She lives in an apartment I pay for. So yeah, she does." Holt grabbed his jacket. "Unless you've got some claim on her I don't know about." Carlo didn't answer. Didn't need to. Holt left, slamming the door hard enough to make the windows rattle. The cafe remained silent for 3 full seconds before conversation slowly resumed. Marco returned to his position. Polly went back to his newspaper. Angela closed her laptop and quietly left. Susan stood frozen, her wrist cradled against her chest, staring at Carlo like she'd never seen him before. "Susan," Mira called gently from behind the counter. "Why don't you take your break? I've got the floor." Susan nodded mutely and walked toward the back of the cafe, her movements mechanical. Carlo followed at a distance, waiting until they were in the small employee break room before closing the door behind them. She stood with her back to him, shoulders trembling. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I'll quit. I'll leave tonight. You don't need this kind of trouble because of me." "Sit down, Susan." "No, really. I should just sit down." She sat on the old couch against the wall, her hands twisted together in her lap. Carlo pulled up a chair and sat facing her, close enough to seem approachable but far enough to not be threatening. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "How long?" Carlo asked finally. "How long what? How long has he been hurting you?" Susan's face crumpled. She tried to hold it together, tried to force that practiced smile, that rehearsed excuse. But something in Carlo's tone, gentle but absolute, broke through every defense she'd built. 8 months, she whispered. "It started slow. Just jealousy at first, wanting to know where I was, who I talked to. Then the phone calls. Then he moved me to a new apartment, said it was safer, that he wanted to take care of me. I thought," her voice broke, "I thought it meant he loved me." "When did it turn physical?" 4 months ago. I came home late from a double shift. My phone died, so I couldn't answer his calls. He was waiting in my apartment. Said I'd disrespected him, embarrassed him, made him look like a fool calling a phone that just rang and rang. She touched her ribs unconsciously. He pushed me against the wall, grabbed my wrists so I couldn't move, told me if I ever ignored him again, it would be worse. Carlo's hands curled into fists, but his voice remained steady. "And it got worse anyway." "Yes." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "It's never enough. I answer every call. I text him my location. I don't talk to other men. I come straight home after work. But there's always something I did wrong. Something that disrespects him. He says I made him this way, that if I just listened better, tried harder, loved him properly, he wouldn't have to correct me." "Correct you," Carlo repeated, the words tasting like poison. "That's what he calls it. Correction." Susan wiped her eyes roughly. "And I can't leave. He tracks my phone. He knows where I work, where I live, where my aunt lives upstate. He said if I ever try to leave him, if I ever tell anyone, He'll make sure I regret it. He's a cop, people believe him, not me. Who's going to help someone like me against someone like him? Carlo leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his voice low and intense. I am. Susan looked up, confusion and hope warring in her expression. You work under my roof now, Carlo said. And no one, not a cop, not a detective, not the entire NYPD hurts someone under my protection. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I don't understand any of this. Why do you care? I'm just a waitress. You're not just anything. Carlo's voice carried absolute conviction. You're someone who testified against a criminal 4 years ago because it was the right thing to do, even though you knew it would cost you. You're someone who shows up every day despite being terrified. You're someone who deserves better than a man with a badge who uses it as a weapon. He'll kill me if he finds out I talked to you. He's not going to touch you again, ever. Carlo stood, moving to the small window that looked out over the alley. I need you to trust me, Susan. Can you do that? She stared at him for a long moment. Carlo Accardo, a man whispered about in certain circles, whose name carried weight and fear in equal measure. A man who probably had blood on his hands and darkness in his past, but also a man who'd just faced down her abuser without flinching. Yes, she whispered. I trust you. Good. Then I need you to go home tonight like normal. Answer Holt's calls. Act like nothing happened. Can you do that? Why? Because in 2 weeks, maybe less, Raymond Holt's entire world is going to collapse. And when it does, I need him focused on saving himself, not on hurting you. Carlo turned to face her. But if he comes near you, if he threatens you, if he does anything that makes you feel unsafe, you call me immediately, day or night. Understand? Susan nodded, accepting the business card he handed her. One more thing, Carlo said. What happened 4 years ago, the robbery you witnessed, the testimony against Marcus Webb. That's why Holt targeted you, isn't it? Her eyes widened. How did you? Because I pay attention. And because men like Holt always have reasons for the cruelty. He's been punishing you for telling the truth. Yes, she admitted. He told me once, after he'd been drinking, said I'd humiliated him, cost him his best informant, made him look incompetent. Said I needed to learn there were consequences for crossing him. Carlo's expression went cold and hard. There are consequences, he agreed. He's about to learn that firsthand. The package arrived at the Times New York Chronicle-Times offices on a Tuesday morning, delivered by courier to Diane Hartfield's desk. No return address. Just a plain manila envelope with her name typed on the front. Inside were 47 pages that would destroy Raymond Holt's life. Diane spread them across her desk with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd received anonymous tips before. Bank statements showing deposits that didn't match a detective's salary. Photocopied police reports with handwritten notes in the margins notes that contradicted the official accounts. Database query logs showing hundreds of unauthorized searches. And most damning, a spreadsheet correlating Holt's financial deposits with cases that mysteriously collapsed or evidence that disappeared. Attached to the front page was a typed note on plain paper. Asterisk Detective Holt has been using his badge to extort, intimidate, and corrupt for years. The evidence is real. Verify it independently. Look at case #2019 to 4471 Torres, case #2081 to 8834 Calabria, case #2013 to 2156 Morrison IA hearing. The victims are afraid to speak, but the paper trail doesn't lie. Someone needs to tell this story before more people get hurt. Asterisk. Diane read through everything twice, her journalistic instincts firing on all cylinders. This was bigger than her previous articles. This wasn't just evidence tampering, this was systematic corruption, extortion, abuse of power, if it was real. She picked up her phone and called her editor. Tom, I need researchers and a lawyer. I just received something that's either the biggest story of the year or an elaborate setup. Which one? Tom asked. Give me 72 hours and I'll tell you. Diane worked through the night, verifying every detail she could. The bank accounts existed. She confirmed that through public records. The cases listed were real. She pulled the court documents herself. The database queries could be verified through NYPD's own internal systems, if she could get someone to leak the official logs. She made calls, lots of calls, to sources inside NYPD, to lawyers who'd handled cases against Holt, to witnesses who'd mysteriously changed their testimonies. Most wouldn't talk on record, but enough confirmed details off the record that the pattern became undeniable. By Thursday morning, she had enough. Tom, she said, walking into her editor's office with a thick folder. We need legal to review this before publication. But I've verified the core allegations. Holt's dirty. Really dirty. And I can prove it. How solid is your sourcing? 3 independent confirmations on the financial irregularities, 2 former witnesses willing to go on record about intimidation, and I've got copies of official case files that match the anonymous documents. Someone inside NYPD with access to internal affairs records sent this to me. Tom leaned back in his chair. Or someone with very good hackers. Does it matter? The information is accurate. I've checked it 6 ways from Sunday. It matters for the story. Are we reporting on corruption or reporting on illegally obtained evidence? Diane had anticipated this. We frame it as an investigation based on anomalies we noticed in public records, then confirmed through independent sources. The anonymous package just pointed us in the right direction. Everything we're publishing comes from legitimate sources we verified ourselves. Tom considered this, then nodded slowly. Write it. 5,000 words. Full investigation. We run it Sunday. Front page. Above the fold. And Diane? Triple check everything. If Holt has the connections people say he does, he'll come after us hard. Let him try. While Diane prepared to publish, Carlo executed the second phase of his plan. Angela Russo walked into the Manhattan office of the FBI's Public Corruption Unit carrying a different envelope. This one contained evidence of federal crimes specifically, Holt using interstate banking systems to move money derived from extortion, which made it wire fraud and racketeering. I need to report corruption within the NYPD, Angela told the receptionist. She was shown to a small conference room where Special Agent Victoria Chen listened to her presentation with increasing interest. These are serious allegations, Chen said, reviewing the documents. How did you come across this information? I'm an investigative journalist, Angela said, using her real credentials. I was researching a story on evidence handling procedures and stumbled onto irregularities in Detective Holt's cases. When I dug deeper, I found the financial connections. It wasn't entirely true, but it was true enough to be believable. We'll need to verify this independently, Chen said. I understand. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm asking you to look. Because if even half of what's in those documents is accurate, you've got a detective who's been running a protection racket out of the 14th precinct for years. Chen made copies of everything and promised to open a preliminary inquiry. By Friday, Raymond Holt had federal investigators quietly looking into his finances. The final piece fell into place Saturday evening. Tommy hacked into Holt's personal computer, the one he kept at home, not his department-issued laptop, and found exactly what Carlo had been hoping for. A folder of surveillance photos of Susan, pictures taken from across the street from her apartment, screenshots of her phone's GPS location, logs of every call, every text message, every website she visited, digital stalking, cataloged and preserved like trophies. Tommy anonymously sent copies to Diane Hartfield with a simple message, *, check the metadata, all taken after hours, using personal equipment. This is what he does to women who trust him. *. Diane added it to her story as a sidebar. Detective also accused of stalking, harassment. Everything was in position. Sunday morning, the Times New York Chronicle Times published Diane Hartfield's exposé across the entire front page. NYPD detective's secret. Years of corruption, extortion, and abuse of power. The story was devastating. Detailed. Impossible to dismiss as speculation or grudges. Diane had done her job perfectly, presenting the evidence in a way that demanded response from authorities. By noon, every news outlet in New York was running the story. By evening, the FBI confirmed they'd opened an investigation. By Monday morning, Internal Affairs had raided Holt's home and seized his computers. And Detective Raymond Holt, who'd spent years believing himself untouchable, woke up to find his face on every television screen in the city, labeled as a corrupt cop, an extortionist, and an abuser. Carlo read the coverage from his office, a cup of espresso cooling on his desk. Phase 1 complete. The world now knew what Raymond Holt really was. Phase 2 would be even more satisfying. Raymond Holt was spiraling, and everyone could see it. The surveillance footage from Monday showed him leaving his apartment at 6 a.m., unshaven, wearing the same clothes from the night before. He'd been suspended pending investigation, placed on administrative leave while Internal Affairs and the FBI tore through his life like wolves through a carcass. His phone hadn't stopped ringing. Reporters camped outside his building. His union rep had stopped returning his calls. Even his mother had disconnected her phone after journalists found her number. By Tuesday, Holt looked like a man who'd aged 10 years in 48 hours. And he blamed Susan for all of it. Vince's surveillance team caught him circling her apartment building 3 times Tuesday night. Wednesday morning, he called her 17 times in 2 hours. By Wednesday afternoon, he'd started leaving voicemails that grew progressively more threatening. I know you talked. I know you went to the press. You're going to pay for this, Susan. I'm going to make you regret the day you met me. Carlo listened to the recordings in his office, his expression carved from ice. He's breaking, Vince said. Completely losing control. Good. How's Susan? Terrified. She's been staying at Mira's apartment the last 2 nights, didn't want to be alone. But she's still showing up for her shifts. Tell her not to come in tomorrow. Boss, she's not going to listen. She needs the money, needs the routine. I think working is the only thing keeping her sane right now. Carlo considered this. Then we make sure she's protected. I want you here tomorrow, Marco, Polly, and Angela. Full coverage. You think he'll come here? I think he's got nothing left to lose, and men with nothing to lose do desperate things. Carlo stood, moving to his window. He'll come, and when he does, the entire city is going to watch him destroy himself. Thursday morning arrived cold and gray, the kind of November day that made people hurry from warm building to warm building without looking up. Susan arrived at Cafe Verona at 6:52 a.m., exactly on time despite everything. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her hands shaking slightly as she tied her apron. But she showed up. Carlo watched her move through her opening routine, his chest tight with an emotion he couldn't quite name. Respect, maybe, or recognition of a courage that matched anything he'd seen in 20 years of dangerous living. The morning passed quietly. Customers came and went, oblivious to the tension humming beneath the surface. Marco stood near the door, reading a newspaper he wasn't actually reading. Polly sat at a window table, his bulk casual but ready. Angela worked on her laptop at the counter, positioned where she could see the entire cafe. Vince sat with Carlo at his corner table, both of them watching, waiting. At 2:17 p.m., Raymond Holt walked through the door. He looked like hell, bloodshot eyes, 3 days of stubble, his clothes wrinkled and stained. But more concerning was the wild energy radiating from him, the barely contained rage of someone who'd been pushed past their breaking point. Several customers looked up, then quickly away. Some recognition flickering across their faces, times that's the cop from the news times, followed by the instinctive decision to not get involved. Holt's eyes found Susan immediately. She was clearing a table near the back, her movements freezing as she saw him. Susan, he called across the cafe. We need to talk. Now. She didn't move. Couldn't move. Susan. Louder now, angrier. Don't ignore me. Carlo stood, buttoning his suit jacket. Across the cafe, Marco straightened from his newspaper. Polly set down his coffee. Angela's fingers moved across her laptop keyboard times, recording asterisk. Detective Holt, Carlo said calmly. You need to leave. Holt spun toward him, eyes blazing. You're behind this, aren't you? The articles, the investigation, all of it. You put her up to this. I did nothing except notice that someone was hurting my employee. Everything else was your own doing. Bullshit. Holt advanced toward Carlo, his hands clenched into fists. She told you things, private things about our relationship, and you used them against me. That's witness tampering, or intimidation, or what? Carlo's voice remained perfectly calm, which seemed to enrage Holt further. I'm not a witness to anything. I'm just a businessman who doesn't appreciate his staff being terrorized. She's lying. Whatever she told you, she's lying. I haven't told him anything. Susan's voice cracked across the cafe, surprising everyone, including herself. I didn't go to the press. I didn't talk to internal affairs. I haven't said a word to anyone. Then how? Holt wheeled on her. How does some random cafe owner know about... He caught himself, but too late. Know about what? Carlo asked quietly. About the extortion? The evidence tampering? The abuse? Outside, Carlo could see what Holt couldn't. News vans pulling up to the curb. Cameras being readied. Diane Hartfield stepping out of a car with her notebook. The trap was set. Angela had sent the tip 30 minutes ago. Asterisk. Corrupt detective. Confronting victim at Cafe Verona on Thompson Street. Asterisk. Holt took a step toward Susan, and that's when Vince moved, placing himself between them, a wall of muscle in an expensive suit. That's close enough, Vince said. Get out of my way. She's my girlfriend. We're leaving. Together. She's not going anywhere with you, Carlo said. Holt's laugh was brittle, breaking. You think you can stop me? You think because you've got some muscle and some money that you can… He shoved Vince, trying to get past him. Bad mistake. Vince didn't retaliate with violence, didn't need to. He simply stood his ground, immovable, while Holt bounced off him like a wave hitting a cliff. Last chance, Carlo said. Walk out that door now, detective. While you still can. While I still can? You threatening me? You threatening a police officer? I'm not threatening anyone. I'm pointing out that there are at least 3 news cameras outside right now, filming through the windows. And every second you stay here, every word you say, every move you make is being recorded and will be on every television screen in New York by tonight. Holt's face went white. He spun toward the windows, seeing for the first time the small crowd gathering outside. The cameras, the reporters. You set me up, he whispered. No, Carlo said. You destroyed yourself. I just made sure people were watching when you did it. Holt lunged not at Vince, but toward Susan, his hand outstretched like he could grab her, drag her out, make her fix this somehow. He never got close. Marco and Polly moved simultaneously, intercepting him mid-stride. They didn't hurt him, didn't even throw him to the ground, just caught his arms and held him immobile while he thrashed and screamed. Let me go. Police brutality. Assault. You're not on duty, Carlo observed. And you're the one who became physical first. Self-defense on our part. The cafe door burst open. NYPD uniforms rushed in, not Holt's precinct, but officers from a different district who'd been called by the crowd gathering outside. NYPD! Everyone step back! Marco and Polly released Holt immediately. Hands raised, cooperative. This man is assaulting my girlfriend, Holt shouted, pointing at Susan. And these men attacked me. Sir, you need to calm down, one of the officers said, recognizing Holt. Recognition followed by something else, distaste maybe. Or disgust. Detective Holt, you're currently under investigation. You shouldn't be here. I can go wherever I want. I haven't been charged with anything. Sir. She's lying. They're all lying. I'm being framed. One of the officers turned to Carlo. What happened here? Detective Holt entered my establishment and became verbally aggressive toward my employee. When asked to leave, he refused and attempted to physically grab her. My staff intervened to protect her. That's all. That's not, Holt started, but one of the officers cut him off. Sir, we're going to need you to come with us. On what charge? I haven't done anything. Disturbing the peace, trespassing, potentially harassment. We can sort it out at the station. Outside, cameras captured everything Holt being escorted from Cafe Verona, still shouting about conspiracies and frame jobs. The disheveled ex-detective being led to a patrol car while reporters shouted questions. Inside the cafe, Susan collapsed into a chair, her entire body shaking. Mira rushed to her side, wrapping her in a hug while she sobbed relief, terror, exhaustion all pouring out at once. Carlo watched through the window as the patrol car drove away, taking Raymond Holt toward whatever remained of his future. It wouldn't be much. The public confrontation, captured on camera and witnessed by dozens, was the final nail in a coffin Carlo had been building for months. By evening, the footage would be everywhere. By tomorrow, the FBI would have even more ammunition. By next week, Holt would likely be facing criminal charges. The war was over, and Susan Allison was finally, truly safe. The headlines exploded across every major outlet within hours. Disgraced detective confronts alleged victim in public meltdown. Raymond Holt arrested after threatening woman at Manhattan Cafe. Corrupt cop's downfall, from hero to zero in 1 week. But the story underneath the headlines was bigger than one corrupt detective. The Times-Chronicle Times published a follow-up investigation, revealing that Holt's lieutenant, Kevin Walsh, had buried not just 3 complaints but 7. The FBI expanded their investigation to include Walsh and 2 other officers at the 14th Precinct. The mayor called for a comprehensive review of internal affairs procedures. Raymond Holt had become a symbol of everything wrong with systems that protected abusers, of badges used as weapons, of power without accountability. And it had all started because a cafe owner noticed bruises on a waitress's arm. 1 week later, Susan returned to work. She arrived at 6:52 a.m., exactly on time. But something was different. Her shoulders weren't hunched. Her hands didn't shake. When she smiled at customers, it reached her eyes. Carlo watched from his corner table, his espresso cooling as it always did, his newspaper unread as it often was. He'd spent the week dealing with police statements, media inquiries, and ensuring that every legal protection possible was in place for Susan. The FBI had granted her witness protection status for the upcoming trials. A pro bono lawyer had helped her file a restraining order. And Carlo had quietly arranged for her apartment lease to be transferred to her name alone, with 6 months' rent paid in advance by an anonymous benefactor. She didn't know about that last part. Didn't need to know. Around 9 a.m., during the morning lull, Susan approached his table carrying a fresh espresso this time, her sleeves rolled up normally, the faded bruises visible but no longer hidden. "Mr. Ricardo," she said softly, setting down the cup. "May I sit, please?" She perched on the edge of the chair across from him, her hands folded in her lap. For a moment, she just looked at him. Really looked at him like she was trying to understand how a man like him had chosen to save someone like her. "You did it," she said finally. "What you said you would do. You protected me. I kept a promise, nothing more. It's everything more." Her eyes shone with unshed tears. "I've been thinking about what to say to you for days, but nothing seems adequate. Thank you feels too small. You gave me my life back. You never lost your life. You just needed someone to remind you that you deserved to have it." Carlo leaned back in his chair. "What happened to you wasn't your fault, Susan. And what happens next, that's entirely up to you. The FBI wants me to testify. Against Holt, against the others they're investigating. Will you?" She nodded slowly. 4 years ago, I testified because it was the right thing to do. It cost me everything. But now I understand it was worth it, because truth matters. Justice matters. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Carlo felt something shift in his chest. This woman who'd been broken and terrorized and afraid was choosing courage again. Choosing to stand up and speak truth to power, even after learning exactly how much it could cost. "You're braver than most of the men I know," he said quietly. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "But I'm also free. And I want other women who are where I was to know that they can be free too. That having a badge doesn't make someone untouchable. That there are still people who believe in justice." She stood, smoothing her apron. "I should get back to work. But Mr. Ricardo, Carlo, I want you to know something. You didn't just save me. You showed me that even in the darkest places, there are people who still care about doing what's right, even if they don't look like heroes." After she walked away, Carlo sat alone with his thoughts and his cooling espresso. Around him, Cafe Verona hummed with normal life conversations. Laughter, the familiar sounds of a world continuing to turn. He'd built his empire in shadows, made decisions that kept him outside the law's reach, crossed lines that most people couldn't imagine crossing. He wasn't a good man by any traditional definition, but he'd done one good thing. Protected one person who deserved protection. Used his power not to destroy, but to defend. Maybe that didn't erase his past, but maybe it was a start. Vince appeared at his table, sliding into the chair Susan had vacated. "You hear the news? Holt's lawyer is trying to negotiate a plea deal, facing 14 federal charges and about 30 state charges. He's looking at 20 years minimum." "Good." Walsh and 2 other officers from the 14th are cooperating, giving up evidence on Holt in exchange for reduced sentences. The whole precinct's under investigation. They're calling it the biggest corruption scandal in NYPD history. Carlo nodded, absorbing the information without visible reaction. "There's something else," Vince said, his voice careful. "People are talking. Not bad talk, good talk. About how you protected Susan. How you took down a corrupt cop without violence. You're becoming, I don't know, different than before. I'm exactly who I've always been. Maybe, but people are seeing you differently. And boss?" Vince smiled slightly. "I think maybe you're seeing yourself differently too." After Vince left, Carlo finally picked up his espresso. It was cold now, but he drank it anyway, watching Susan move through the cafe with new lightness in her step. In a city built on fear and corruption, Carlo Ricardo had done something unexpected. He'd made the law itself tremble not through violence or intimidation, but through patience, strategy, and an unwavering commitment to protecting someone who couldn't protect herself. The newspapers would call it many things: a scandal, a takedown, a victory for justice. But Carlo knew what it really was. One man noticing a woman's bruises and deciding that she mattered more than the system that failed her. 3 weeks later, Susan approached Carlo's table one final time during her shift. This time, she carried an envelope instead of espresso. "What's this?" he asked. "A letter. For you." She set it down carefully. "Don't read it now. Read it when you're alone. I wanted to put into words what I couldn't say out loud." Carlo accepted the envelope, tucking it into his jacket pocket. How are you doing? Really? Better. Some days are harder than others. I still look over my shoulder sometimes, still flinch at loud noises. But I'm sleeping through the night now. And I'm talking to a therapist one the FBI Victim Services recommended. She smiled, and this time it was genuine, warm, reaching her eyes. I'm healing. Slowly, but really healing. Good. I'm also enrolling in school. Spring semester at NYU. I want to study social work, maybe work with other women dealing with abuse. Turn what happened to me into something that helps others. Carlo felt pride swell in his chest, an unfamiliar emotion. That's good, Susan. That's very good. None of it would be possible without you. She hesitated, then reached out and squeezed his hand briefly. Thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked away. After her shift ended and the cafe closed, Carlo sat alone in his office and opened the envelope. Inside was a single page, handwritten in careful script. Asterisk. Dear Carlo. Asterisk. Asterisk, I don't know how to thank someone for giving you back your life, but I'll try. Asterisk. Asterisk, before you, I thought I had to accept the violence. I thought being hurt was the price I paid for being loved. I thought powerful men always got away with it, and people like me just had to survive however we could. Asterisk. Asterisk. You showed me something different. You showed me that power can protect instead of destroy, that justice is possible even when the system fails, that one person noticing, one person caring, one person deciding to act that can change everything. Asterisk. Asterisk. You're not a perfect man. I know that. You've probably done things I don't want to know about, made choices that would frighten me if I understood them fully. But you're a good man where it mattered most. You saw someone suffering and you chose to help, even when you didn't have to, even when there was nothing in it for you. Asterisk. Asterisk. That makes you a hero. My hero. Asterisk. Asterisk, I'll never forget what you did for me. And I promise you I won't waste this second chance. I'll live the kind of life that honors your gift. I'll be brave. I'll be honest. I'll help others the way you helped me. Asterisk. Asterisk. Thank you for noticing my bruises. Thank you for caring. Thank you for proving that even in the darkest places, there's still light if you look for it. Asterisk. Asterisk. With eternal gratitude, Susan Asterisk. Carlo read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in his desk drawer. Outside his window, New York City continued its eternal rhythm, millions of lives intersecting, millions of stories playing out in shadows and light. Somewhere in that vast machinery, Raymond Holt sat in a cell awaiting trial. Somewhere, Susan Allison was dreaming about her future instead of dreading it. And in a quiet cafe on Thompson Street, a man who'd spent his life in darkness had found one small piece of redemption. It wasn't forgiveness for his past. It wasn't absolution for his sins. But it was proof that even monsters could do something beautiful when they chose to notice the suffering of others. Carlo Accardo, feared mob boss, ruthless strategist, man of violence and shadows, had become the unlikely savior of one brave woman. And in saving her, perhaps he'd saved a small piece of himself as well. The espresso machine hissed softly below, preparing for tomorrow's first customers. Morning would come, as it always did, bringing new problems and old shadows. But tonight, in this moment, Carlo allowed himself something rare: satisfaction. Thanks for sticking with this story till the end. If you enjoyed it, you're going to love the next one. It's packed with unexpected turns and heartfelt moments. Click the image on your screen to keep the journey going, and make sure to hit subscribe for more amazing stories. Drop a comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I can't wait to see what you think.